this is Felicia Moore, your host for another exciting episode of Realty Resources and Realities. Again, I'm your host, Felicia Moore, and I certainly want you to do me a favor before we get started. If you have not already, please subscribe to our channel and share the information. We are into a wonderful series. We're going to do tips 5 and 6 today. And the series is Renting Right. Must know tips for a smooth rental experience. I'm going to go over some of the tips that we had before, but I want to let you know that today we're going to focus on tips 5 and tip number 6. So if you've already liked or you haven't subscribed, please do so. Also, I just want you to know that I can be reached. We would love to have your show ideas and things that you would like to hear about, or if you have real estate related questions that we can help. We are a resource here at Exit Realty West Midtown and want to help you. So please reach out to me any way you can. But the best way is to email me at askfelicia@exitwestmidtown.com, or you can text me. You can text Ask Felicia to 85377. I'll leave it up on your screen so you can always reach out to me if you have small groups, large groups, people who need some information, because there are a lot of scams out here. People are losing their property. People don't understand the buying process. Please reach out to me. I want to be your resource and I want to help. And we'd love to come to your community event and give a few spills, because there are a few things that you should do. But before I digress in that, I do want you to please make sure that you share this information. Tell them what Felicia's up to, and get more subscribers. We would love for you to subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell so you'll get all the notifications and know when we're coming on. So let me go back as a recap, and then we're going to take a break, and then we'll get started with today's content. So as a recap, the very first show we did was the show on this. So tip number 1 is the most important. And I told you, don't go to worry about tip 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because we have 10 tips that we're giving. Don't worry about those. Don't even look at those until you have looked at tip 1. So if you're looking at this now, I want you to go back and watch tip 1, because if you don't fix tip 1, the rest of it's going to be a disaster. So tip 1 is the budget. And if you do not know all of the things you need to take into account in terms of budgeting and having money to make your rental experience smooth, you are really going to be hurt. And that goes for people who are looking to buy a home. There are a lot of financial considerations that you need to take. I didn't go into a deep dive on home ownership, but call me or email me and I'll call you right back, and I can walk you through those. But the budget is the number 1. Number 2 is location. Finding that location that works for you, whether you have to move further out because you can't afford closer into your work, and taking account how much that's going to cost you, looking at other options, making sure that you have the amenities that you're looking for and you're able to get to them, whether you have a vehicle, whether you don't have a vehicle. So location is important. The property condition, avoiding scams, making sure that you are not being scammed, number 1, and to a pretty picture online of what this property looks like, but you don't know what the property is because you haven't been there. Never ever rent a property without seeing it first. Also, you might want to have some little testing done, particularly if you have respiratory issues, if you have allergies. You just kind of need to make sure there's no mold in the place, know the maintenance policy of the landlord. Number 4, which was the last show that we did, was the lease agreement. I'll talk a little bit more about that again today, but you need to read and understand that lease agreement. Don't let someone just walk you and give you the high points. You need to know those fine details because while it may not matter today, it will matter when it matters. So the lease agreement. So now we're going to take a quick break to go to tip 5 and tip 6. I'll see you on the other side. In the meantime, please like the video. Thank you. All right, we're back and we're going to dive right into tip number 5. And tip number 5 is landlord property management. I've got plenty of notes on this, so sit back and get your pencil ready and write it down. So, first of all, particularly if you're moving into what I'm going to call an apartment unit, apartment complexes, or something like that. Now, there's two things that can happen. One, you move into an apartment building, which has a firm, and then there's some other scenarios that you may rent a home from a private homeowner, a mom and pop, a small person who maybe has 2 or 3 houses that they rent out, or one, or you may also rent a condominium unit, or something like that. So no matter what, you need to find out who the landlord is, whether it's a property management firm that you're going to be dealing with, or whether you're going to be dealing one-on-one with the landlord. I would also advise, if it's a company, you can do research on them. Google is a great thing. Many of the search engines, you can use that. You want to look for reviews and references about the landlord or the property management. And the reason why I say landlord and property management is because both are important. And you want to know what other people have said. What have other people's experiences been? If it's a private landlord, it's just Felicia Moore, landlord renting to you. You can always check court records in that county to see if tenants have filed any suits or anybody has filed suits, because typically one person or two, shop or a very small landlord may not have reviews that are out there that you can readily find. But you can go to your county court record. You can do it online, put the person's name in there, or if they go through a LLC or a company name, put that in and see what comes up and see if there are any lawsuits. Maybe it may be a whole bunch of evictions where they've evicted people. Well, that'll tell you something about that landlord. It'll tell you that they're not playing around when it comes to you paying your rent and on time, and they will file for you to be evicted. It can tell you a lot. And if you look at the backup documents to some of the cases, if there are any, you can find correspondence that went back and forth maybe between the judge or the tenant file, so that you can get a sense of what you're dealing with or who you're dealing with. Now, if it's a property management company, their name is going to readily come up in a website. They're going to be reputable. Hopefully, you should be able to put their name in and reviews. Business Bureau is also a great place to check whether it's individual and or business, whether they're members of the Better Business Bureau or not. If individuals have filed complaints with the Better Business Bureau, that information will be there, as well as whether they were able to get that issue resolved. And they may rate them, and that may give you some information. So you want to do and see and check for any history of disputes or legal issues with tenants. The communication style, if you go into a leasing office or you're talking to the landlord or the company on the phone or whatever, you want to know what their communication style is. How responsive is it? are they? If you call them and you're interested in renting and you haven't heard anything from them, and they're not returning your call, that may be something you might think about. Are they responsive to your calls? If they are not calling you back because you want to give them money by renting their property, are they going to call you back when you have a complaint? Those are things that you may want to consider. I also say go to the property, particularly if it's an apartment complex or building. If you can get in the gate, if it's a gated community, or if you can be outside, whatever you can do, you may be able to reach some people that actually live there and say, hey, I'm interested in renting in this apartment complex. You live here. How long have you lived here? Can you tell me about the management? Do they take care of your needs? Do they fix things? I want to know any problems before I see them. And you will be surprised how open and honest and forthcoming they will let you know. So you want to do your research on your property and management company. You want to also look at that lease. Now, we talked about that in step 4, but I want to go over a few more tips and we'll take a break and we'll come back to number 6. But let's go back over a few things because this has a lot to do on what you should know in terms of your landlord and your property management company. Going back to that lease, and I'm going to now be specifically talking about Georgia. But I will say to you, in terms of tenant rights, we're actually on number 6. You need to look at the tenant's rights wherever you may be. So I'm going to take a break because I want to make sure that we're going to deal with this number 6. But tip number 5 is to research the landlord or property management companies. Find out if there were problems before you decide to sign that lease. We're going to come back and talk about your rights as a renter in tip number 6. We'll be right back. And in the meantime, please like, share, and subscribe.
Residual income has been an absolute life changer for me, and it's been a shift in my mind as well from becoming just a transactional agent to an entrepreneur that has multiple income streams.
Residual income is a different revenue stream, and it's designed to fill in the gaps between your paychecks.
The ability to earn income in between closings or while I'm on vacation has been a great way to leverage myself.
Residual income for me, it's just that extra security.
Exit Realty Corp International has paid out over $500 million in single level residuals, and it's just absolutely fabulous.
So you do the work once, you're looking for people just like you, and you're working together arm in arm to build this future for yourself and your families.
Okay, we're back. We're going to go now into number 6 because we've already made sure that we didn't find anything that gave us any concerns about the landlord or the property management company that we're going to be dealing with at least for a year. Tip number 6 is now where we are, and that tip is tenants' rights. Knowing your local laws. I'm going to give you some here in the state of Georgia, but you may be anywhere in the country. You can find out. It's a quick Google search. What are your renters' rights in X? And they should be able to give you the state law and local laws that will be able to help you. But I'm going to deal with Georgia for right now because that's where I am, and give you some idea, if you're not here, those kinds that you may want to know about, and you understand why, knowing what your rights are as a renter are. So you're going to familiarize yourself with your tenants' rights in your area, including your rules on eviction, rent control, security deposits, and what legal protections you have. So this is where we go back to revisiting step number 4 when we talked about the lease agreement. Not only reading it, every word of it, but understanding every word of it, not just letting someone talk you through it. You want to make sure you know, because here's the thing, what'll happen, Nobody wants to read all that stuff, but here's the thing. Is when you need help, when there is an issue, when there is a problem, what's going to happen is you're going to have to go back, find that lease, and always put the lease in a place where you can find it when you need it, and try to find out if you have be harder then, and then you may find out that you don't. But if you read that lease and you understood it up front, you would know what you can do. So let's go over a few things. Here in Georgia, you have to have a written lease agreement, but that does not apply shorter than 12 months. So if you have a month-to-month lease, or you have a 6 months lease, anything shorter than a whole year, 12 months, you do not have to have a written lease. That does not mean that you, the landlord, or the property management company cannot enter into an agreement, which I would suggest that you do, because otherwise you leave yourself vulnerable to a whole host of things. If it's less than a year, it's not required to have a written lease, but I would suggest that you get one anyway. Because there will be disputes, and you want to make sure that you have something in writing. The rent amount and due dates, we talked about that. That's going to be in the lease. You want to know, for clarity, the rental amount, the due dates, and any grace periods or late payments. Know that, because there are some landlords and property owners, if they say your rent is due on the 1st, we're giving it to the 5th. On the 6th, we're going down to the courthouse and file. And by the way, if you want us to stop the filing for you to be evicted, you got to pay your late fee. And there may be an exorbitant late fee. So please make sure that you have those things in the lease. The security deposit and the terms, again, you want to know what that is up front, way up front, when you're dealing with your budget, but you're also going to need to know that and what you can and cannot receive back at the end of your lease term. Georgia law caps the security deposit to a reasonable amount, but it doesn't define what's reasonable. So it's really discretionary in terms of what the landlord or the leasing company wants to do. And the conditions on how it gets returned are not mandatory. So that's why that lease is important. That's why it's important for you to do a walkthrough. Make sure that you keep a sheet of the walkthrough, note any damages, take pictures, take videos, and then that. So when you turn the property back over, you can prove, hey, that little hole in the wall that you're trying to ding me for, that hole in the wall was there when we moved in. Here's the pictures. Here's what we signed off on the walk-in report, all of that. Termination clauses. There will be rules around termination, and life is a strange thing. You could go and lease the place you've done all your months, you may have to move for another job somewhere else. You need to know, how can you terminate this lease and what exposure you will have financially if you terminate the lease before the end of the lease term. Those things are in the lease. You need to look at it, see what the periods are for notification, see what the penalties are for early termination. So, a few other things in terms of tenants' rights in Georgia. Security deposit return. And this one is an interesting one, because people expect, I'm moving out today, I want my security deposit back today. Well, in the state of Georgia, your landlord or your property management company has up to 30 days to return your security deposit and provide you a list of deductions or explanations about that. So if you're looking for that security deposit for that next property, understand legally they do not have to give it to you immediately. They have up to 30 days to do that. Other rights in Georgia, rent increases. What can be done about your rent? Georgia does not have any rent control, so there is no control over the rent. And so they can increase, they being the landlord and the property management company, can increase the rental amount as much as they like, whenever they like, except they cannot do it while you're in the middle of a lease term. So, for instance, you have a 12-month lease. In June, they can't just come up and say, hey, we're adding $200 more or $1,000 more or anything like that. They cannot do that. They can only increase it after the end of the term. When you go to renewal, they can say, okay, we'll renew it for another year, but rent is gone up by $200. And then you have to agree to sign on for another year at the increased rent. But they can rent it, they can raise it as much as they want, but they cannot do it during the lease term. They can only do it when you're renewing the lease, or, well, it won't be an increase, but they will tell you what the stated rent is then. Eviction process. Here, Georgia law allows landlords to evict tenants for non-payment of rent or lease violations. So not paying your rent can get you evicted, or violating the terms of the lease, which is why you have to read the lease. If the lease says you have to pay a non-refundable deposit, and the landlord shows up on one of their scheduled visits and finds out you have a pet, you have violated the lease. You could be evicted. Or if you don't pay your rent for 2 months, and they've let you get by for not paying for 2 months without, they can make sure that you get out of there. But they must give written notice before filing an eviction lawsuit. So they will, in writing, let you know that they are going to file for an eviction. Hopefully you don't get to that point where they have to write you and then find yourself getting a notice to come to eviction court because you're going to pay your rent on time. I always tell people, if you can develop a good relationship with your landlord or your property management, if there's a financial situation that comes up, most people will work with you. They'll work with you if you let them know well in advance, or as much as advance as you can, but they're not as apt to work with you if you haven't paid in 2 months and now you're calling them wanting to work something out. They may not want to work it out at that point. They may just be ready to cut ties. And you always have your right to contest an eviction in court. I will say, though, not being able to pay is not a good reason in court, unfortunately. So just go into court and say, hey, I don't have the money, does not keep you from being evicted. Discrimination. You have the right to housing, and people should not be prohibited from housing based on discrimination of race, religion, sex, national origin, familiar status, or disability. And that is the Georgia Fair Housing Act, as well as federal law. So if you think that you have been discriminated against, you can always file a complaint regarding that. The landlord has some responsibilities as well. The landlord is supposed to keep the property habitable, and Georgia law requires them to maintain it. That means you're working plumbing, lights, gas, etc. You shouldn't have rodents, you shouldn't have mold, you shouldn't have health issues. You need to make sure that you document those if you have them, document when you call to have them fixed, document when they come to fix them. you may need that later if you find out you have a slum landlord that's not doing right. But if you did your due diligence and looked up the landlord and actually visited property before you sign that lease, you will kind of know whether or not you may end up with issues, because there may be issues there before you move in that you may require them to fix before you sign the lease. Tenants may file a lawsuit or withhold rent if things are not fixed. Be very careful of that. You can file a lawsuit. Withholding rent could get you evicted. So be careful with that. Make sure you reach out to some nonprofits or legal aid or someone and get some advice before you decide to withhold rent, because there are things that you have to do. You can't just not pay it. You may have to put it in escrow and all of that. There's a whole process to make sure it's done legally. So do not do that on your own. Make sure you seek some legal advice. Notice of entry. Landlords are required to let you know when they're going to enter their property, and it's best to make sure you have those things in the lease and you have a discussion with them about how that will take place. You as a renter have responsibilities. Again, paying the rent, maintaining the property, making sure things are not getting damaged outside of normal wear and tear of the property, and complying to the lease terms. And if the lease terms say that you are not supposed to have pets, ever, don't have pets. If they talk about not being a drug dealer and selling out of the property or things like that, violating the law, then you need to make sure that you are being cautious and making sure that nobody that I'm sure you wouldn't, or people that you know are not doing things in and around that property that could violate the terms of the lease. And so you have a couple places that can help you if you find that you have disputes, and that would be a small claims court for damages up to disputes up to $15,000. That could be security deposit issues or unaddressed repairs or concerns. And then there are a lot of tenant advocacy groups, tenant advocacy groups that can help you as well. And you might want to Google them and reach out to them, because they have been through it all and they can provide you guidance. The best thing I will say in all of this is to be proactive. Keep your detailed records, understand what your rights are. And so we've discussed the property management team and what your tenant's rights are. And we will go into the next number 7 and 8, 9 and 10 are up on deck, where we'll be discussing neighbors and community, utilities and services, the move-in checklist, and your plan for the future. We'll do that in the next show. I hope I've given you some tips. I know I talked fast. You can always replay this. I ask you, please, if you haven't already, subscribe. That will be so helpful to us. And like it and share it and hit those notification buttons so that you can get this and all of our content. Again, I really thank all of you for joining us in. We're doing the best that we can. Here is our contact information. I look forward to seeing you on our next episode of Realty, Resources, and Reality. Until then, bye-bye.